Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hey, I'm Robin. I'm one of the hosts of Books That Burn, the book review podcast where we discuss fictional depictions of trauma from the perspective that the author is the only one with agency. Today, I'm here to discuss one of my favorite games that I've played on and off for years. Neverwinter Nights 2 from Obsidian. It is a D&D RPG with several sequels and expansions. If you've heard of Baldur's Gate, it's similar to that, but I have not played much Baldur's Gate. So in high school, I played the main campaign the most and never actually finished either Mask of the Betrayer nor Storm of Sahir because I just liked the main campaign so much. So I'll keep to that one for most of my commentary. So other than the sheer nostalgia of I played this game a lot, I played the base game a lot. So I love it partly because it's a thing I played a lot of, but also what kept pulling me back to it is that Neverwinter Nights 2 is built on relationships and the consequences of your actions within the narrative. So in these relationships with the NPCs, it encourages what is technically a kind of gamification of relationships, but for me as a teen, it ended up being more of a way for me to navigate the kinds of interpersonal dynamics which I have a hard time tracking in real life. There are NPCs that you can have in your party that hate each other. They hate each other for good reasons that make sense and are explained, and you're able to anticipate what they're going to like or not like, and you can figure out a way to only have these NPCs in certain scenes at certain times and choosing who you're going to take with you such that you can play an evil character but not end up with the paladin hating you. Like, that's possible in this. Now, what happens in the game? All right, so Neverwinter Nights 2, the main campaign, opens with a festival where you're trying to win 4 prizes with your best friends, Bevel and Amy. It's a not at all disguised tutorial, and you can skip the festival if you don't care about the influence and minor achievements in this section. But it does set up some plot stuff for later. Very minor plot stuff. Your character has a foster father, the abrasive and emotionally distant elf Dagon, who sends you away after the village is attacked by a Githyanki that are beings from another plane, who keep calling you a strange name. They keep calling you Kalakcha, and they're looking for shards of what turns out to be a sword. And also it turns out that one of those shards is in your chest. This leads to your character having the name the Shard Bearer within the game and also on the wikis and stuff. Like, that's what you're called, no matter what you actually end up doing with your character. On the way to the city called Neverwinter, you pick up a tiefling rogue named Nishka and a dwarven fighter named Kelgar, and you have an opportunity to either fight or form a truce with some lizardlings. Before you make it all the way to the city of Neverwinter, you're joined by an elf named Eleni who has a subplot about the mare, which is a local swamp, being slowly corrupted. Once you actually get to Neverwinter, you can decide whether to access some areas by way of joining the Watch for more of like a lawful type of playthrough, or by working for Axel and Mora, 2 local affiliates of the Shadow Thieves of Am. That's another city in the Forgotten Realms, which is like the giant setting that these games take place in. At some point in all of your quests and side quests and fetch quests and doing errands for people, a village called Ember is attacked and burned, and you arrive too late to save anyone, but just in time for the rival city of Luskan to use your presence as grounds to claim that you actually burned the village and killed all the people. There's a sizable plot involving getting evidence and witnesses, and then a pretty cool trial sequence, which is one of my favorite parts of the whole game. No matter how the trial goes, it gets followed by a trial by combat. And that's between either your champion and Lorne, an agent of Luskan who was originally from your village many years ago, and it's actually local history in your village that he was the last one who'd won all 4 events back in that tutorial earlier. It turns out that Luskan's plan is part of the machinations of an ancient entity called the King of Shadows, and the final portion of the game revolves around getting a fortress called Crossroad Keep ready to defend against his armies. The King of Shadows is responsible for the corruption in the mayor, which Eleni has been dealing with also. This is a slower section, which depends on decisions you've made up until now, since how well you can prepare the keep depends on earlier decisions, like whether you made a truce with the Lizardmen and whether you helped Kelgar reconcile with his clan. After the long period of preparation, the Shadow King's armies advance, and you have a multi-stage fight to defend Crossroad Keep. After you survive that, you and your companions head to the stronghold of the King of Shadows, where one of his representatives, who has been plaguing you the whole game, tries to convince your companions to turn against you. Now, this just hurt me so much when I was a teen, because I was like, no matter how well you do, you cannot keep them all. At minimum, there are two of them who hate each other, and you can only keep whichever of them you have higher influence with. So after this really great multi-stage battle and all the drama of like who's going to turn on you, and then the actual fight, your victory is great for Neverwinter, but personally bad for you because the game closes in a rocks fall, almost everyone dies moment. If you go on to play the follow-up game, Mask of the Betrayer, which is a full game in its own right, you can continue with your character from the base game, and you'll wake up underground in a faraway city with the shard in your chest removed, but no idea what's going on. This has additional side plots, fantastic turns, and too much for me to list without both spoiling the whole game and not being able to say enough about it to do it justice. For anyone who has played it, my favorite character is Bishop, the chaotic evil ranger who was maybe supposed to be a romanceable NPC, but his and Nishka's romance plotlines were cut, leaving only Eleni for male characters and a human paladin named Cassavir for female characters. I love the gnome bard Grobnar. I love his plotline with the Wendersnaven, which are a bunch of powerful invisible entities whom he insists exist, and can end up giving him a Wender kazoo, which is a musical instrument that the game treats as an item, but looks to everyone like he's just miming playing something in the air. Now, any game is more than just the plot. The experience is also driven by the mechanics, the little things that change how it feels to play this as opposed to anything else. It's set in the Forgotten Realms, as I mentioned earlier, and it uses D&D 3.5. You control one character's actions at a time, but you can pause and queue actions for several characters before resuming. Because combat in 3.5 is based on 6-second rounds and a lot of dice rolls, there's a constantly running window that holds conversational dialogue, any narration, and the dice rolls behind the movements happening in combat. You don't just know that you landed a hit or not. You can see the calculations which went into whether you've made it and how much damage you do. For anyone who's played a tabletop RPG, it's showing you all those numbers that you would normally have access to as a player, and it also shows you some that you wouldn't normally, like the difficulty class of that lock you're trying to open, so you can use the thieves' tools with exactly the necessary bonus to get through it. This mix of direct control and autopilot can lead to a hands-off feeling, like it's a very interactive movie rather than a game, but the completely unrelated 2021 game Loop Hero is a more recent version of this kind of playstyle. I'll also say, as someone whose hands hurt easily, this is much friendlier on my joints than a lot of more popular games where the player handles every moment. I don't have to manage every sword swing and spell, but I have exactly as much control as I want over equipment, items, how my character levels up, parameters for the autopilot when I'm not controlling a particular character, etc. I can pet my cat when she gets in front of the screen, all while the game is still going. If I've intrigued you and you think you might like to play Neverwinter Nights 2, the definitive edition is currently available on Good Old Games, and that has the base game plus 3 expansions. It was the game I played the most in high school, and I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to talk about it and the prompting to get it again, DRM free this time. If you'd like to hear me talk about books instead of games, you can find me on Twitter at Books That Burn, and you can find the podcast and my written book reviews at booksthatburn.carrd.co. Thank you so much to Matt and everyone at the Fun and Games podcast. Happy gaming! Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.